could join us tonight. And it turns out that these speaker series, our candidate series and special, if you don't have audio on the first one, do you want to play the second one?
No, there's audio. It's just that I can't remember where to click it to make the audio come.
Oh, well, maybe you want to do it after he speaks.
Okay. Yes, let's do that. I apologize.
Okay, so we'll let Sherry get on with that, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight. I have the pleasure to introduce Matt Gunderson. He is a Southern California businessman who is married and a father of 4 daughters, and he's running for California's 49th Congressional District. He built 3 businesses from the ground up over 25 years ago, and he has created hundreds of jobs in Orange County. As a community volunteer, he served on the Mission Hospital Foundation Board and also the Saddleback College Foundation Board. Matt is running for Congress and will work to get our southern border closed and safe, reduce inflation, lower the cost of living, and reduce crime. He was recently featured on Fox News, and he talked about his plan for flipping blue states to red. We'd all like to see this happen nationwide, and especially here in California. So please welcome Matt Gunderson.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it that you're giving me this opportunity to visit with so many who spread out, not just California, but throughout the United States. And as I shared with a few of you early on, I'm a little bit of the newcomer here, and I'm not a seasoned politician. And so I always worry when I see some familiar faces and familiar names that I'm like, you know what, you've heard me speak before, and I feel bad because I don't have any new material. What you see is what you get, and I don't change my story. I very much, who I am, and I'm not going to change my message, whether I'm speaking to Republican women or independents or a service group, because I think it's important to be true, be candid, be transparent, and be the person who, if I earn your vote and if I get elected, the person you expect me to be when I get there, get to Washington. So with that said, I'm a new politician, so to speak, but I'm not new to this whole idea of the 49th Congressional seat. Those of you who live in the 49th District or live in Southern California, Orange County, Northern San Diego County, realize that we lost this seat when Darrell Issa retired 6 years ago from the 49th, and the Democrats picked it up. And we have had good candidates running, and it was always this constant frustration that why can't we unseat this ultra-progressive Mike Levin? And when I say I'm not new to this race, I simply say that because I was a consistent supporter of our candidates. I supported them, I donated to them, I held events for them in my home, and I shared that frustration that, man alive, why does Mike Levin keep winning? So when Burgess Owens, the congressman from Utah, and Mimi Walters, the former congresswoman from Orange County, and others came to me and started to talk to me about this race, I had to think to myself, what's going to be different in 24 that wasn't there in 18, 20, or 22. And I'll share that with you, but first I want to go back to how I even got involved in the political world, because as you saw a little bit on that TV commercial from the primary, I'm a political outsider, I'm a businessman, I didn't come up through the channels of local government. So why are you sitting here in a congressional race, you might be asking, particularly those of you who aren't familiar with my story. And I apologize for those of you who are, because this is a little redundant, but I think it's important for people to understand the underpinnings of what is my motivation here. I sold my businesses that were referred to in 21. And right away after I sold, Pat Bates, the incumbent state senator here, and Mimi Walters came to me and said, Matt, what are you going to do now? Because we think you should consider running for the state Senate. Pat Bates was our incumbent state senator. She was termed out. She was recruiting me. She was going to endorse me. It was a +1 Republican district. And there's something in my DNA that believes public service is valuable and more of us should participate, and too few of us do. So I decided, you know what, I'll do that. Well, fast forward to the following December, and redistricting comes out, and this +1 Republican district becomes a +9 Democratic district. So a 10% swing in voter registration. And so Pat Bates calls me up and says, are you still going to do this, Matt? And I said, you know what? Number one, I committed to you. Number two, I think it's important to have credible Republicans on the ballot in every race we can find them. So yeah, I know it's an uphill battle, but I'm going to fight that fight. So we ran in that +9 Democratic district, in a district, and for those of you who probably know this, but congressional districts are smaller than state Senate districts in California. So this state Senate district ran all the way from downtown San Diego up the coast into Orange County. And interestingly enough, the way they made it a +9 Democratic district is they excluded some of the significantly most highly populated, strongest Republican cities in Orange County. Dana Point, San Clemente, Laguna Niguel were not in the state Senate district, but I did have downtown San Diego. So I ran in that race and I ended up losing 52-48, despite the union spending $6.5 million out of Sacramento, beating me up with flat out lies. The teachers and the nurses went after me, and not once did they ever ask me about my position on education or my position on healthcare. It was all lies about Donald Trump and a myriad of other things. So with that said, my moral victory there was, if I had not made that +9 Democratic state Senate district competitive, they would have used that $6.5 million against some other Republicans. They would have gone after Lori Davies. They would have gone after Brian Jones. They would have gone after Michelle Steele. Who knows? But so I took that moral victory to bed and said, well, that was an interesting experience. And, met a lot of great people. And now we'll get back into the non-political world. But then the following January, people who read these numbers much closer than I do, started to come to me and said, and among them were Burgess Owens and Mimi Walters, and said, Matt, you ran stronger than every Republican candidate we had on the ticket. You ran 6 percentage points ahead of Brian Marriott in the parts of the district you shared. And you never got to have that Republican stronghold of San Clemente, Dana Point, and Laguna Niguel. Would you please look at the 49th race? And so that takes me full circle back to wondering, like, what could be different in 24 that wasn't different in the earlier cycles? And for me, it gets back to, let's start out with my story. Like was mentioned, I'm a political outsider. I'm a businessman. I didn't come up through the channels of local government. So my story's a little bit different. My community involvement was not political involvement. My community involvement was serious, just public community involvement. I was on a Mission Hospital board for 10 years. While I was there, I chaired the capital campaign that raised $62 million to build Tower 2 at Mission Hospital, which is now the largest medical facility that serves this district, congressional district. I sat on the Saddleback College Foundation board, recognizing the importance of that junior college, that community college, and the trade vocations that educate and make education accessible to people there who are not necessarily destined out just for a 4-year school. I was a youth sports coach for years. My tentacles in the community were just community-based, not political-based. And I think that gives me a little bit of a different angle. And interestingly enough, in our primary campaign, 60% of our political donors were first-time donors to a political campaign, because I have relationships with a lot of people that are not your traditional party activists. And I think that helps us going into this race. Then I think you look at the issues that are at play right now. They're just continually inching closer and closer to Republicans' thinking. You can't look at what's going on at the border, what's going along in the cost of living, what's going on in public safety, what's going on in education, without seeing people who are frustrated, even people who don't consider themselves diehard Republicans that aren't frustrated. So I think in politics, timing is so much of the dynamic. And I think the timing is right where we have this opportunity to seize the day. And, the time is ripe to flip this seat. And lastly, for those of you who study numbers as close as others do, you might know this, but some numbers that reflect in this district. Lonnie Chen, our state controller candidate, won this congressional district by 7 points. The governor's race was a dead heat, 50-50. And the number that jumped out to me most conspicuously was, In the last election cycle, just 2 years ago, Mark Moser, our US Senate candidate, who's a fine young man, but did not have the infrastructure or the resources to run a strong campaign against Alex Padilla, got 48% of the vote in this congressional district. That tells me that the basement for the Republican vote is 48%. So when you've got an opportunity to articulate your message, articulate your passion, articulate your perspective to this district, that getting from 48 to 51 is a really, really doable job opportunity or doable chore. So those are kind of like the mixture of things that convinced me, okay, let's get into this. So to give you a little bit of background on who I am as a person, and this is going to bore some of you, I know, because you know me, but I was born and raised in rural Wisconsin. I'm the seventh of 8 kids, went to a 2-room grade school in the little rural community of Pleasantville, got bused to high school 6 miles away, and my graduating class was 77 kids. And I went off to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I was a journalism major there. And I always joke because, yes, there are a few conservative journalists left out there, but I never really pursued journalism. But I took a job. My first job out of college was in the sports marketing industry, and in Chicago. And I worked there, and then I did my MBA at the University of Chicago in finance and marketing, and then ended up having this opportunity to come to California and build a business. And when I got that opportunity, it made some sense for me because my wife's a 5th-generation native Californian, so it made some sense to come to California. But I honestly did not believe I would stay here. I thought that I would come to California, build this business, get it operational, and 3 or 4 years later, sell it and head back to the Midwest. And 25 years later, I'm still sitting here. And now this is where we raised our 4 daughters. And, you know, I've become very much a Californian, so to speak. But so to give you a perspective on my business activities in California, I had an opportunity to come to California and open an Open Point Infiniti dealership. Infiniti obviously is a car brand, and an open point simply means you're awarded the franchise, but there's no business there. There's no infrastructure. There's nothing. They simply say, okay, you can have an Infiniti franchise, but you're going to do this in Mission Viejo, and that's as much guidance as they will give you. You've got to go find the land. You've got to build the business. You've got to find your capital. You've got to finance the operation, et cetera. So I did that. I started Infiniti first, and then based on that success, and what we were able to accomplish there, we added an Audi Open Point as well. And then for both of those, we had applied for them. I had applied for them, and you know, you're awarded the Open Point, so to speak. And then after our success in Infiniti and Audi, we were able to, the Volvo folks came to us and said, hey, we'd really like you to put a Volvo store in Mission Viejo. So over the course of those 25 years, we had 3 dealerships, employed well over 250 people, created jobs, gave people opportunities to live the American dream, and we, you know, found great success in that. And I'll share with you that the automobile business is not a passion. And I always tell people, particularly high school kids or college kids that are thinking about what their next step is, I'm like, you know what? It always bothers me a little bit when people say, follow your passion. Because I think life is such where your passion always isn't just served right up to you on a silver platter. I think you need to seek your opportunities, identify your opportunities, and then find passion in those opportunities. And for me, the car business was an opportunity to seek those passions of creating jobs and giving people the opportunity to, and some of them without college educations, to live the American dream. And, you know, that was very, very fulfilling for myself. And so, you know, we sold in 21, and it's interesting. You never know if it's the best time to sell your business, but I know it wasn't the worst time to sell. You know, post-COVID, it was an interesting experience. I lived through the governor shutting our businesses down. We were able to keep our service department open for a short time, or on a smaller scale, but the activities basically diminished to about 15% of normal activity. Well, you cannot run a business, sustain a business that's highly capital intensive and cash flow hungry on 15% of your normal operations. So the stress of living as a businessman through COVID was quite an interesting experience. But you know, now after selling, I didn't know what the next chapter was going to be, but obviously here it is. It's become politics. And again, I've always said, back to that issue of passion versus opportunity, this has become my passion, particularly my passion right now. I jokingly say, I'm the unemployed candidate, having sold my businesses. My passion is to work full time to retire Mike Levin. I think this is an incredible opportunity here because we have that, like I said, timing is everything in politics. We have a political environment and a political atmosphere that I think we can make some really, really significant Republican gains in this cycle. And that's a great opportunity. And then lastly, so many have heard me say this, but my very first favorite quote is a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that talks about your purpose in life is not to be happy, it is to be useful. And I personally believe that you can find a whole lot of personal happiness by identifying your usefulness. And I would simply say to you that's what drives me here. That I want to be useful to the 49th District. I want to be useful to the Republican Party, and I want to be useful to my friends and neighbors. I have 4 daughters who are adults and who have, none of them would, my youngest just graduated from high school. She's off to college in the fall, and none of them would apply to a California college. And when we'd say why, and they're like, look, Dad, we can't afford to live here when we graduate unless we're living off of you. So we need to find out what other place we might be able to find an opportunity and find a living situation that we can afford. So, they're scattered. We got one in Miami, Florida at the University of Miami, who's now attending law school. We have a daughter at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who'll be a senior. We'll have a sophomore at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. And then our youngest is going to Oklahoma in the fall. So, we are living that situation, watching our children leave the state. And, other people are watching their grandchildren and their children leave the state. And that's one of the big motivations I have, aside from so many other issues, is trying to figure out how we right the ship in California and make it the cost of living perspective such where people can stay in California. And, I think there's a litany of other issues, and I think we should talk a little bit about my opponent. People don't understand or aren't unaware that Mike Levin in the 49th District, his voting record is more liberal than Katie Porter's. But Katie Porter is bold and brash about it. She stands up with her whiteboard and she screams from the mountaintops about who she is. The key to Mike Levin's success is that he is wallpaper. He is under the radar. Nobody really knows what he's about. But when you dig into his voting record, he votes 98.7% of the time with the Progressive Caucus, 100% of the time with Joe Biden. He's a member of the Progressive Caucus. He's an original sponsor of the Green New Deal. And he comes back to the district and acts like he's a moderate consensus builder who's representing the 49th District. This district is only a 2% Democratic registration advantage. Unlike that state Senate district of 9% advantage that I lost 52-48, this is only a 2% Democratic registration advantage. So it's really a third, because there's a solid no party preference decline to state block in the middle in excess of 30% as well. And you cannot look people straight in the face and be a 98.7% Progressive Caucus voter and tell them that you're representing the 49th District. It's just not true. So our job is to expose that hypocrisy of who Mike Levin is, the walk he walks in Washington, D.C. versus the talk he talks when he's in the district. And also, I think it's important that we understand that there's a lot of people who are very, very concerned and very, very focused on their day-to-day life that have a tangential, kind of uninformed vision of the political world. And I shared this story with you because early on in this congressional campaign, I was in San Juan Capistrano, a successful businessman that some of you probably know, saw me at an event and he said, Matt, I hear you're running for Congress. And I said, yeah. And he says, but you're a Republican, aren't you? And I said, yeah. He says, well, why are you running against Mike Levin? He's a Republican. And that shows me exactly what a consummate politician Mike Levin is, and still being a crappy congressman. He's not doing his job for the constituents of the 49th, but he's doing his job as a politician. And I think that takes us full circle of what do we have to do as Republicans and as candidates to expose that hypocrisy. So I think right now that's kind of, I could get into more issues, but I think it's more important that I get your questions. And if you have questions about, what drives me and what motivates me, I'm happy to answer any of them. You will find most political consultants will say businessmen that they work with in politics talk too much. So I am trying to ratchet down my answers and ratchet down my speeches to be a little more focused and a little more interesting and a little more, targeted. So, I'd welcome questions at this point, and we can, take it from there. And I'm sure my answers will probably be longer than you want them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Gretchen, do you have something that you'd like to start with?
Sure. You mentioned that your district is I think you said a 2-point lead Democrat, correct?
Correct.
So how are you overcoming that? And I'm curious about the responses or support you're getting from other businesses in your district as well.
Every small businessman who sits down and that we sit down and talk with understands exactly what California is doing to strangle them. And then with inflation, it's you're kind of getting the double sword. California is hard enough as it is to do business in, and now with the cost of living, the inflation, the attack on the energy sector, et cetera, the federal government's attacking small businesses in California at the same time. So, we're doing very well on the business side because I lived it. I can sit down and talk about the impact of wage and hour law out of California and regulations and expense structure and interest rates and all day long, and how they impact your ability to be productive and profitable. And so, excuse me, if you're a small business, you're not a charity. You still have to make money, obviously, for yourself, but to be able to support your employees and your infrastructure. So from a business standpoint, that's, we're a natural coalition. My opponent's an environmental activist attorney who's never really held a job. He was the executive director of the Orange County Democratic Party. He was on the city council in San Juan Capistrano when he ran for Congress, and the rest is history. So his ability to understand what it's like to sign the front of a paycheck and just isn't there. We can get into some other environmental issues and differences between him later, but I do want to point out, Gretchen, that our post-primary poll, for those of you who didn't follow this primary, there was 4 Republican candidates. And I got more votes than the other 3 Republican candidates combined, and which sent us on a great trajectory for November. And with that said, the National Republican Congressional Committee did a poll with 1892 right after the primary. And it came out, not a push poll or anything, but just a straight out Republican Matt Gunderson versus Democrat Mike Levin was 44-42. I share that with you because obviously the incumbent was sitting at 44. His name ID is significantly higher than me. But based on what we ran, the messaging we had in the primary campaign and our name ID, we were sitting at 42. The National Republican Congressional Committee was euphoric about it because a couple things. First of all, that's closer than Brian Marriott ever got in those cycles. And some of that is timing and some of that is messaging. But they also said it's very difficult for an incumbent to get more than he's got. He's sitting at 44. And that shows significant vulnerability for him because under normal campaign circumstances, if we have the resources and we have the ability to get our message out and introduce ourselves to those undecided voters, the lion's share of that 14% undecided voters is going to go to the challenger, which puts us in a great spot when we're within the margin of error already. And I think a couple other things about the dynamics of our poll was that everybody always asks, how are you going to handle Trump? What are you going to do about Trump on the ballot? And, Biden won this district by 11 points 4 years ago. His lead is down to 5. So I was just on a Zoom call with Speaker Johnson today. He's coming in July to do an event for us in San Diego. And we had a Zoom call with our host committee down there. And, we talked about the political environment and how it's different. And I shared on that Zoom call that, people always expect you to talk about a Trump drag. And I think this year we can talk about a Biden drag. In these volatile districts that Biden had won, the Trump issue is just not as strong for these undecided voters. They've decided if they voted for Biden once, they're not doing it again, and they've become Trump voters. So we're fortunate again in that atmosphere of timing and such that I think we are going to hammer home the fact that Joe Biden is almost the godfather to Mike Levin in terms of, they're two peas in a pod, and we are going to make sure people understand that.
You want me to ask another one, Nancy?
Yeah, go ahead and then
Okay. Okay. So, you have been on Fox now a couple of times, and some of our women have seen you on that, and we're very impressed. One of the things that you primarily talked about was your strategy for turning a blue seat to a red seat. So can you talk to us about that and how how candidates in other parts of the state, because we do have women tonight with us that are from other parts of California, not to mention Idaho. So can you tell us a little bit about that strategy and how you're implementing it?
Yeah, Gretchen, I think it's important that you stop and think about what are the 75–80% issues that we all agree on, and you need to hammer those home. And I think right now in this cycle, we all agree that the number one issue is the border. You cannot look and talk about public safety, public health, you name it, without first and foremost dealing with the security and the closure of the border. And, then, in this district, I think it's also, and across California, it's easy to talk about cost of living and inflation and what it costs, what this state is experiencing as we watch our children and our grandchildren have to leave the state because they can't afford to live here. That has to be addressed. And then interestingly enough, not just in my own instincts, but in our polling, the number 3 issue is that issue of parental rights and government involvement in the schools and usurping parents' roles in their children's lives. And, that's a massive uniter among even independent voters. And you have to be really far left to think that the schools and government are better parents than parents. And so you take those issues and, the border falls into public health and public safety. So I'm not saying crime isn't important, but the border kind of encapsulates all of that. And you take the issue of the border, you take the issue of inflation, then you take the issue of government's role in education and your family. And those are all 75–80% issues that if we talk about those, the common sense perspective of conservative thinking resonates with people. And, it's getting in there and having a candid, transparent conversation. And I would tell everybody, and maybe this is my naivete of not being a politician and being an outsider, but I would say, look, you're not going to agree with me 100% of the time, but you're never going to have to wonder where I stand on an issue or how I got there. And I think at the end of the day, virtually everybody who's looking to government for solutions or to stay out of their life want transparency and candor. And I think there's just something about the Republican philosophy as we are into individual liberties and individual accountability and individual responsibility. And I think that resonates with people. I mean, we're not trying to make our state and our country a commune. And, I think if you focus on the issues that matter to the bulk of them, or to those 70–80% of people, you have an opportunity to begin a conversation. Now, with that said, you're still going to run into some people who just absolutely don't want to have that conversation. And I will always tell you that the far left is far less tolerant than the far right. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, when you run into them, they don't want to have a conversation. They just want to attack and walk away. And, I think it's important to have conversations. I'm the seventh of 8 kids. I grew up in a house that we all politically agree, but we politically agree to degrees. We're not all carbon copies of each other. And I was just in Minnesota yesterday for my aunt's funeral, and all 7 of my siblings joined there as well. And it's fascinating to sit and now visit as adults and have conversations about the issues at hand. And I think that's something we need to take, that kind of family dialogue and that family perspective, and branch it out into our communities and continue to have civil conversations.
Great.
Okay, now I'll ask a question, and I just want to know what main points you want us and actually voters to remember about you and your candidacy. What's important that people know about you?
Well, I'm going to tell you that on that Senate campaign, which was, the first California campaign that I got involved in, the biggest compliment anybody gave me, and it happened often, was, Matt, you just seem too genuine to be a politician. And, I take that as a compliment, and I take that sincerely, because, back to my quote about the fact that your purpose in life is not to be happy, it is to be useful. That truly is what drives me. Like I told some of you that I grew up in a tiny town in rural Wisconsin, 7th of 8 kids, and my parents instilled that in us. They instilled that kind of rural set of values in us, and a work ethic in us that said, what, to those who much is given, much is expected, and step up and serve your community. And I think that's my personality. Aside from that, I think I want you to believe me when I say you're not going to agree with me 100% of the time, but you're never going to have to wonder where I stand on an issue or how I got there. And if you disagree with me, I'm going to sit down at the table and talk to you. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to hear you out. We're going to have a conversation. And at the end of the day, I have my best intentions in place to represent the 49th District. Certainly, from a from a policy standpoint, I have 4 daughters. And you cannot watch what's happening on the border and hear the stories of Laken Riley or Rachel Morin or, the 12-year-old from Texas who died. I mean, you cannot hear those stories and not sit back and wonder, what, when is that going to come to Southern California? California's become the epicenter of our border problem right now, and the illegal crossings are hitting us in the face on a constant basis. We haven't heard those terrible, tragic stories here yet, but when is it going to happen? So that's a passion. We've got to close the border. Again, I think the cost of living issue is something that we have to address. We're overregulated, we're overtaxed. We've got to get back into being energy independent in this country, because one of the big drivers of inflation is just the cost of production, the cost of delivery, the distribution process. We cannot do it. I had an argument with a friend, actually, over the phone back in the Midwest, who's complaining to me about the Trump tweets. And I said, what, I'm just not bothered by Trump's tweets anymore, because I choose policy over personality. But besides, he can tweet all he wants as long as I'm not paying $9.99 for a 12-pack of Coke. It's like, we've got to get back to being able to live, here on a cost basis that's tolerable. And, and then again, I really truly believe that parents should be in charge of their families. The idea that the government gets involved in our schools, the government gets involved in their families, is just ludicrous. And, I'm not going to tell you how to live, but I don't think the government should be telling you how to live either.
Thank you. What are the duties of a U.S. representative, and how do you think you're going to make a difference?
Well, here's an interesting, I get asked that question often, and as I said, I'm the seventh of 8 kids. My oldest brother, when I was in high school, ran for Congress in the state of Wisconsin, and he unseated an incumbent Democrat when I was a senior in high school and served in Congress for 16 years until he chose not to run for re-election. So I'm not completely naive to the process and to this whole idea of what it takes to win a campaign and what it takes to, serve your constituency. So with that said, I use him as an example. I think your number one job as a freshman representative is to represent your constituencies. You're not going to go to Washington, D.C. and take the world by storm. And I would share with you that I'm not going to Washington, D.C. to become a celebrity or build my Twitter following. That's not what drives me. I want to be a consequential part of the process so we can help our district. With that said, I think you as a freshman representative in the 49th need to focus on, with Camp Pendleton, on the Veterans Affairs Committee, if possible. You need to understand the economic driver that Camp Pendleton is to this district. And I think you need to represent and serve the interests of the veterans that have retired in your district, as well as the current people who are stationed at Camp Pendleton. In addition to that, you can't, and this is going to take you to the environment. I would love to serve on some of the environmental subcommittees of the Energy and Commerce Committee, because while Mike Levin on the environment is virtue signaling by telling you, voting to get rid of your gas stove, to ban your gas stove and get you out of a car and onto a bicycle, he's shirking the obligation, the environmental concerns that exist today. I think we should be focused on sand replenishment, coastal bluff preservation. Those beaches are an economic driver in this district, and we've got to protect them and restore them. And then also, we've got this Tijuana sewage plant down in at the Mexican border that is tainting our beaches as the water flows north. And that's got to be solved, and that problem's got to be fixed. And, so I think constituent service and representing your district's interests is your first and foremost obligation as a freshman.
Very good.
Great. Gretchen, do you have anything?
Yes. Can you give us an example, Matt, of a time when you had an opinion about something significant, political, and ended up changing that opinion? Can you think of a time? Or have you just always been right?
No, I don't know that I've always been right. I would say I'm not always that smart, so I'm sure there might be something like that. So that's an interesting question, because I think, oh man, I don't know if I'm sure there's multiple of them where I've changed my mind. And I think as you age, you change your perspective on being a parent, you change your
That's okay. I don't want to put you on the spot.
yeah,
That is kind of it is kind of
Gretchen, I'm
a,
going to have to figure that out, because that's an interesting question. And when have I changed my mind?
or your
There's all kinds of issues.
position, yeah.
I can share with you all kinds of times where it's uncomfortable to talk about my position, because I know the people I'm talking to don't agree with me, but I think you still have to have that conversation. But in terms of changing my mind, I just, nothing comes to mind. I apologize.
Okay.
But,
If you think of something, you can tell me at the next Central Committee meeting.
Okay, yeah.
Gretchen, can I just say why that's a
Sure.
relevant question? Because we are hearing a lot of Democrats who are changing now, and they are becoming quasi or maybe full-fledged Republicans because of the last 3.5 years. So
Yeah.
I think that what's happening to our country is opening people's eyes.
Yeah. And I do think that, I was born and raised in a Republican family. My grandmother had a family picture of Teddy Roosevelt in her living room all her life.
I love it.
And when she passed away, I bought it at the auction, and it hangs in our living room.
I love that.
And so my fundamental philosophies have always pretty much been the same. I think as you collect information and you get a little get a broader perspective, some things will change. And I mean, I guess I would tell you, Gretchen, that my position on aid to Ukraine has changed a little bit. I mean, I originally thought, hey, we cannot just continue to send money across there. And then as I've been briefed more on this issue, I think it's become apparent that we cannot let the Russia, China, Iran coalition, push their way in on a gradual basis, or we will end up having boots on the ground. And I think we want to avoid that. And so, I look back on that and I think I've got a little more of opposition to isolationism than I thought I had, particularly on that topic. Whereas, I think Israel is a much easier question. You don't need as much information to decide which side you need to be on in that the Israel challenge that we're fighting.
But it is surprising, isn't it, Matt? I don't mean to interrupt you, ladies.
Please.
These are this is the moving target that we're finding in America among voters. I'm very surprised at what is happening now in the universities but I do also believe it's not organic. I think a lot of this is organized.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what's going on our college campuses is abhorrent. And, it's the answer. The answer to these encampments on college campuses is arrest, bulldoze, and, if they're students or teachers, they should be fired or they should be kicked out of school. I mean, this is simple, and you've got to nip it in the bud. And, this idea that we're negotiating with them and they're taking meetings with them is ridiculous. I mean, but I think you're right. There's been a very much articulated, planned, and calculated infiltration into our higher academic institutions, and they're winning right now. And we've got to step up and take some positions in Congress that say, look, we are not funding any of this. Like you schools, are going to have to live on your own. And if you are participating in the toleration and the accommodation of any of this anti-Semitic behavior, okay, there's no more funding for anything, research, whatever. There's got to be other schools that are willing to take it on. And some of the schools in Florida, and I mean, even University of Indiana plowed down that encampment pretty quickly. So,
Right. Well, we need to meet it that way. And I think it's well funded too, though, Matt. I think
absolutely.
what is happening is this has been planned and funded for a long time. So it didn't just pop up.
Exactly. And it goes back to the border. I've visited the border a couple times. In both cases that I've been there, the vast majority of the people coming across are Chinese. You do not leave China by accident. You don't sneak out of China. They know you're going and they want you to go. And what is it that their, motive and their agenda is? We don't know. And, that infiltration, the CCP infiltration in our country is scary. And it's in our academic systems. It's in our communities. I think it's even infiltrating and trickling down to some of our, high school and lower education entities. And, we've got to take control of that.
Nancy, can I throw one out?
Please.
Okay, so based on what you just said, you're just talking about China. As a congressman, where can you go with that? What can you, and I know a junior congressman, you got to get your feet wet and get in there and all of that. I know it's not a day one thing, but what would a goal be for you in terms of trying to affect some kind of change on what's going on with all the people coming from China and what the number of people that are here from China and the way they're buying up land and everything like that?
I was just going to say, I think, number one, the move to prevent the purchase of land by foreign entities, farmland, land adjacent to our military institutions, et cetera. I mean, we have to do something about that. We have to pass some kind of law that says, look, you're a foreign entity. We're not ready to sell America out to foreign countries. And, China's the one that's got the money and the motivation to buy us up right now. And, we need to, we need to put a stop to it. So I would certainly fall on that side, my 4 daughters don't love it when I say this, but listen, if I have a chance to vote to ban TikTok, I'm voting to ban TikTok. If they can make it an independent American entity, great. But otherwise, I believe that there's enough American ingenuity that can come up with TikTok's replacement. And we have that opportunity to still feed that, opportunity, or that like window of, in our marketplace from our independent ingenuity and not Chinese ingenuity. We just simply have to stop sharing all of our technology and information with China.
Shoot down balloons.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I see that Rudy Melendez has put up some questions there. So
Mhm.
if either one of you could field those to Matt.
You see that?
Nancy, you go ahead with that.
I don't
Okay,
see
well,
it.
I have to get over there. Okay, okay. Let me see.
We'll get to
Chair.
Karen's question too, and then we've got those videos that are ready to be shown
Okay, yeah,
before we're done.
okay. Who is funding anti-Israel campus protests?
Who's funding them?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know who's funding them, but it's certainly, they tell us right now that, there's organizations that George Soros has funded that is supporting them. It's as it has been mentioned, it's an institutionalized, orchestrated program to sow discord, and they're accomplishing it. And it baffles me that the traditional democratic institutions have not stood up and said, stop. I mean, look what happened in Los Angeles on Sunday. If that had been a black church and white supremacists had been outside a black church doing what they did at a Jewish synagogue, it'd be the front page of every newspaper, the first story on the Today Show and CNN, you name it. And, so I don't know the funding source, but I certainly
Have
think,
suspicions.
yeah, it's the traditional, liberal,
Usual suspects.
exactly. That's well said. The usual suspects.
Okay, well,
Why can we not outlaw George Soros and people like him who him to start, but that
Money.
that are
Money.
deliberately trying to tear down this country? Why?
And
Well,
it's
that gets us off
fascinating
the
to it's
subject, but
like you talk about George Soros, and it's fascinating to, like, what is his motivation? He happens to be Jewish.
Yep.
You know what he did in World War II, though, Matt?
yeah,
I
he
know.
worked with
Turned against
the
his own
Nazi.
people.
Yeah, yeah,
Gretchen? Gretchen,
yes.
Okay.
Rudy Melendez has his hand up.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Do you want to just go ahead and let him speak
Sure, I'd love to hear
for a
him.
moment? Rudy, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Unmuted. Okay,
Thank-
Rudy, go right ahead.
Thank you, Janet, ladies, and Matt for being here tonight. This is a wonderful group. I just wanted to clarify, I did pose the question in the chat, but I followed it up with a link to an excellent article that everyone might enjoy. Well, maybe enjoy is not the right word. Find useful, thoughtful information to carry this conversation forward when it comes up again. But Matt, you're a terrific candidate. We wish you continued success. Thanks for having me on the call, Janet.
Thank you,
Rudy,
Rudy.
could I just pipe in there once? Could you send me the link at my email, which is just matt@mattgunderson.com? I'll be candid with you. I'm not the techiest person, so if I'm expected to find the link somewhere in this Zoom recording, I might not do it. But if you'd be so kind to send that in an email to me, I'd really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Before we see the videos, I want to just ask one little last question, and that, do you have any political mentors or heroes, and where can we go to help you in your campaign?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's an interesting question. And, I would tell you that one of my political mentors would have to be my oldest brother, because he set that example. To give you his story is kind of interesting. He came home from college in 1974 and announced to us that he was running for the state assembly as a Republican. This is on the heels of Watergate. And nobody wanted to run as a Republican in Wisconsin in 1974 on the heels of Watergate. But he had dated the daughter of the state treasurer for the Republican Party, and her father had convinced him to get consider it. Well, he unseated an incumbent Democratic assemblyman in 1974, served 6 years in the state assembly, and then ran for US Congress in 1980. And so he obviously, I grew up around the political world, and so none of this is completely foreign to me. But when he got into Congress, if you ever met my brother, he has this much interest in agriculture, cows, and chickens. But his district is a rural Wisconsin district that had more cows than people, more chickens than people. And he became the ranking Republican on the House Ag Committee and America's foremost expert on dairy and poultry, chaired the dairy and poultry subcommittee for years. And I mean, that was his job, not because he found great interest in cows and chickens, but because his job was that. So I certainly use that as a significant mentor on a personal level. You can't look at the leadership of somebody like Ronald Reagan without believing that that is an incredible mentor. You know, I remember, I mean, I graduated from high school in 1981, so I got to watch the Reagan Revolution as I kind of evolved into adulthood. And that was, you know, as I sit here and share that with you, I get goosebumps because I remember walking through the corridors of my high school, you know, arguing with a few teachers, but, you know, watching Ronald Reagan come out victorious after that debacle of 4 years of Jimmy Carter. So, you know, it was, I saw that happen. And, you know, I think if you're ever looking at an old book that's I thought was really interesting, one of my favorite political books is Peggy Noonan's What I Saw at the Revolution. She was one of Reagan's speechwriters, and she's just such a great writer, on top of the fact that she had such an inside scoop and inside look at what you know, what made Ronald Reagan so great. And then again, on a personal level, I've been fortunate to have a long friendship with Newt Gingrich. And Newt is one of the most intelligent, probably the most intelligent person I've ever spent time with. Somebody that actually is almost exhausting to spend time with because he is so smart. And I always share the story, you know, we watched the Super Bowl with him one year, and, you know, the first quarter, he's all about football and everything, but by the second quarter, he wants to talk about how the collective bargaining agreement for the players is going to impact small market football teams like Green Bay and Cleveland, you know? And so, I mean, it's just, he's very thoughtful in an intelligent perspective. And so I've been fortunate to have, you know, that relationship as well, and how he analyzes not just the policy side of issues, but the politics of accomplishing things like the Contract for America, and how you can, even in California, how you can turn California around. And he's been very involved in, you know, our strategies in this campaign. And, you know, I really, you know, benefit from having that kind of thought provocateur on my shoulders as we spend the next 4.5 months attacking Mike Levin.
Wait, you have some wonderful mentors and heroes.
And that's Matt Gunderson at mattgunderson.com.
That's right. Yeah, just go on our website, mattgunderson.com. I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to remind you all we have a June 30th fundraising deadline. And if anybody wants to go online and contribute, invest in our efforts, it'd be much appreciated. Mike Levin is the only incumbent Democratic congressman in the state of California on the Democratic Congressional Committee's vulnerable list. So they are going to put money in here to protect him. So that's going to mean they know they have to, which is great, but that means we're going to have to, you know, raise even more money to beat off the special interests that'll come in trying to protect that progressive vote that they've got.
Wow.
Well, thank you so much. And I think we're going to be seeing your videos now before our
Get ready, Sherry?
president says
Yes,
goodbye to
ma'am.
everyone.
Sherry, it's up.
Yes, yes.
All right. Would that be taking us out then, Sherry? Or are you going to play two?
I've got two.
All right, let's hear it.
Oh, still no sound.
Okay, well, we have trouble with sound, so we will just cut those off and I
More
apologize.
taxes, coupled
Here we go. Here we
with the
go.
mileage tax. Gunderson will fight to keep our streets safe and secure our border.
I'll make California safer and more affordable. I'm Matt Gunderson, and I approve this message.
All right. And then we have another one too.
Good looking family.
Very
Don't
beautiful.
need effects right now. Oh my God.
Okay,
Okay. The other one that we have is here.
okay, get it up with sound and we'll let everybody go.
Can you hear it?
Nope,
It's not
can't
up,
see it either.
but
Okay.
tell you
Let
what,
me start it.
do you think you can? Because I don't want to keep anybody any longer.
No, I can. All right. I'm sorry. Here we go.
There we go.
Docked in the Newport Harbor and entered our country. Local law enforcement was unable to arrest them due to California Democrats' immigration policies. This comes on the heels of a similar incident in Carlsbad earlier this year and another in La Jolla months before that. In response, Matt Gunderson, a Republican candidate for Congress, stated, "It's a 1-2 punch. Biden delivers them and Newsom handcuffs our cops and makes us powerless to stop it locally. Maritime smuggling, people, drugs, and weapons is up 140%. First La Jolla, then Carlsbad. Now Newport Beach. To Liberal opponent Mike Levin, I have to ask, at what point do you stop serving Biden and these crazy policies and start putting your constituents and our communities first?" Paid for by Gunderson for Congress.
Excellent.
Thank you, Matt, for coming tonight, and we are so enthused about your candidacy. We
Thank
need
you.
so many of you.
You're very
Clone
kind.
yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate all your time and everybody giving up an hour of their Tuesday evening to listen to a politician. That's it's people like you that are truly useful to the process. And I always hearken back to that issue. And without people like you, none of us could become, be doing what we're doing. So thank you for your time, your commitment, your passion. And I hope I get a chance to meet some of you in person.
I'm sure you will,
Thank
Matt,
you.
but you really, when you call yourself a politician, you sound more like a statesman to
Thank
us.
you. You're very
Okay,
kind. Thank you.
can you
Second.
repeat the name of Peggy Noonan's book? Someone's asking twice.
What I Saw at the Revolution.
What I
Ah,
Saw at the Revolution. Okay.
all right, wonderful. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. And best wishes, Matt.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Matt.
MattGunderson.com. Don't forget, it's easy. Okay.
All
Okay.
right.
Thank
Donate
you.
All right. Well, thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye.
Yeah,
very
good night.
much. All right,
Every-
good night.
And hope everybody remembers to go to the Golden State Republican Women's website, GSRW.org, and look at the work Sherry's done putting together the Trump, what is it, Sherry? The
Resources Center.
Trump Resource Center.
Resource
Check it
Center.
out. She did a beautiful job on it.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye and good night.
Bye, everyone.
Night.